Of all the Nazis the Allies could have assassinated, why did they choose him? Not Hitler, not Himmler, not Goebbels. They chose Reinhard Heydrich, and the decision cost over 5,000 innocent people their lives. This is the only time the Allies successfully assassinated a top-ranking Nazi official during World War II, and the story of why they did it, how they pulled it off, and what happened next is darker than you might imagine. Before we begin, if you appreciate deep dives into history's biggest what-ifs like this, I'd be grateful if you'd consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps more people discover these stories, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. To understand why Heydrich was the target, you need to know who he was, and more importantly, you need to understand just how powerful and terrifying he had become by 1942. Reinhard Heydrich wasn't just another Nazi. He was arguably the third most powerful man in the Third Reich, behind only Hitler and Himmler. He was chief of the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA. That meant he controlled the Gestapo, the SS intelligence service, the criminal police, and the entire Nazi security apparatus across occupied Europe. But his real claim to infamy: he was the principal architect of the final solution. On January 20th, 1942, just 4 months before his death, Heydrich chaired the 1C conference. That 90-minute meeting in a villa outside Berlin coordinated the systematic murder of 11 million European Jews. 15 senior Nazi officials attended. They discussed logistics like they were planning a business operation, transportation schedules, methods of killing, cost efficiency. Not one person objected to what was being planned. The minutes of that meeting, captured after the war, are chilling in their bureaucratic precision. They talk about evacuation and special treatment, euphemisms for mass murder. They debated whether to kill half Jews immediately or wait. They discussed sterilization programs. They calculated freight car capacity. After the meeting ended, Heydrich sat by the fireplace with his deputies Adolf Eichmann and Heinrich Müller, smoking cigars and drinking brandy. According to Eichmann's later testimony at his 1961 trial, it was rare to see the normally austere Heydrich enjoying himself. He was typically cold, formal, distant, but that day he relaxed. He had reason to celebrate. He just secured bureaucratic control over the largest genocide in history. The Czechs called him the Butcher of Prague. The Germans called him the Blonde Beast. Even other Nazis thought he was cold and ruthless. Himmler once called him the man with the iron heart. Hitler reportedly said Heydrich had a heart of iron, and in Nazi ideology, that was the highest compliment. Heydrich was tall, athletic, blonde, blue-eyed, the perfect Aryan specimen, according to Nazi racial theory. He was an accomplished violinist who could play classical pieces flawlessly. He was a championship-level fencer. He was a skilled pilot who flew combat missions on the Eastern Front, despite Hitler's orders not to risk himself. He was intelligent, efficient, organized, and utterly without mercy. In September 1941, Hitler appointed Heydrich acting Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, what we know today as the Czech Republic. The previous administrator had been too soft, in Hitler's view. Czech resistance was growing. Production in Czech factories was below expectations. Hitler needed someone who would crush resistance completely and increase war production. He chose Heydrich. Within 3 days of his arrival in Prague, Heydrich had executed 92 people. He didn't waste time with trials or investigations. He identified resistance leaders, intellectuals, politicians, and anyone else he considered dangerous, and he had them shot. Within the first month, he'd arrested hundreds more. Within months he'd arrested between 4,000 and 5,000 Czech patriots, personally ordering the execution of 400 to 500 of them. But Heydrich wasn't just brutal, he was strategically brilliant. He understood that pure terror alone might spark rebellion, so he combined what he called the whip and the sugar. He executed resistance leaders while simultaneously improving food rations for factory workers. He crushed opposition while raising wages in armament factories. He made brutal public examples of dissidents, while giving bonuses to compliant Czechs who met production quotas. It worked devastatingly well. Production in Czech factories, ammunition, vehicles, weapons, aircraft parts, actually increased dramatically under Heydrich's rule. The resistance had been largely crushed or driven so deep underground, it was barely functioning. The territory was quiet, productive, and apparently pacified. From the Nazi perspective, Heydrich was doing everything right. Hitler was so pleased with Heydrich's performance, that he was seriously considering promoting him to an even higher position, possibly governor of France, or even a senior role in Berlin that would put him in line to eventually succeed Himmler. Heydrich was the rising star of the Nazi regime, but that very success is what made him a target. By late 1941, Czechoslovakia had a serious political problem. The country was under German occupation, but unlike Poland, Yugoslavia, or Greece, there was virtually no visible Czech resistance. The territory was quiet. Czechs were producing war materials for Germany, efficiently and in increasing quantities. Edvard Beneš, the Czech president in exile in London, was watching his country's international reputation collapse among the Allied powers. At Allied coordination meetings when they discussed resistance efforts across occupied Europe, Czechoslovakia was ranked dead last. Poland had underground armies. France had growing resistance networks. Yugoslavia had partisan forces fighting in the mountains. Greece had active guerrilla warfare. Even Denmark and Norway had visible resistance movements. But Czechoslovakia, quiet, productive, apparently compliant. To outside observers, it looked like the Czechs had accepted Nazi rule. Beneš was terrified, and with good reason. He understood international politics well enough to know that when the war ended, and by late 1941, most people believed the Allies would eventually win, the post-war settlement would be negotiated based partly on what each nation had contributed to victory. If Czechoslovakia didn't demonstrate active resistance, if the Czechs appeared to have accepted Nazi rule, the Allies might not fully restore Czech independence and borders. Remember, Czechoslovakia had already been betrayed once. In 1938, the Munich Agreement had given Czech territory to Germany without even consulting the Czech government. Britain and France had literally sacrificed Czechoslovakia to appease Hitler. Beneš had watched helplessly as his country was carved up. Now, 3 years later, he was desperate to prove that Czechoslovakia deserved restoration. Beneš needed something dramatic, something that would prove the Czechs were on the Allied side, something that would generate massive international attention and sympathy, something that would force the Allies to take Czechoslovakia seriously again. He decided to assassinate a top Nazi, not in Germany, where it would be nearly impossible to reach any high-ranking official, but right in Prague, in the heart of occupied territory. The message would be unmistakable. The Czechs had never surrendered, they were still fighting, and they could strike at the highest levels of Nazi power. The British Special Operations Executive, the SOE, Churchill's organization for setting Europe ablaze with sabotage and subversion, agreed to help. They saw multiple strategic benefits. First, assassinating a top Nazi would demonstrate that even high-ranking officials weren't safe from Allied retribution. The psychological impact would be enormous. Every Nazi officer, every collaborator, would suddenly feel vulnerable. If Heydrich, protected by the Gestapo, one of the most powerful men in the Reich, could be killed, then no one was safe. Second, it would potentially disrupt Nazi security operations across Europe. Heydrich personally controlled the Gestapo and SS intelligence networks. His death might create administrative chaos, power struggles, confusion about command structures, even temporarily disrupting Nazi security, could create opportunities for resistance movements. Third, it might inspire resistance movements across occupied Europe to increase their activities. If the Czechs could pull off something this dramatic, other nations might be emboldened. The question was, who specifically should be the target? They considered Karl Hermann Frank, Heydrich deputy. He was brutal and hated, and he'd be easier to reach. But he wasn't internationally known. His death wouldn't generate the same headlines. Heydrich was the bigger prize. He was one of the most powerful Nazis. He had just chaired the Wannsee Conference. He was the acting ruler of Czech territories. He was young, capable, and widely seen as a possible eventual successor to Himmler or even Hitler. And critically, this is the detail that sealed his fate. Heydrich was arrogant about his own security. Hitler, paranoid about assassination attempts, had given Heydrich 3 direct, explicit orders for his personal safety. First, use an armored vehicle at all times. Second, travel with an armed escort of multiple vehicles. Third, vary your route daily and never establish predictable patterns. These were sensible, basic security precautions that any rational person would follow. Heydrich ignored all 3 orders completely. He drove through Prague in an open-top Mercedes without bodyguards. He took exactly the same route every single morning, from his mansion to Prague Castle, departing at the same time and arriving at approximately 10:30 a.m. like clockwork. He believed himself absolutely untouchable, beyond the reach of the resistance. He thought the Czechs were too intimidated, too broken to even consider attacking him. That arrogance would kill him, and British intelligence knew about it. They had reports about Heydrich's daily routine, his route, his schedule, his lack of security. They knew he was vulnerable. In October 1941, Czech intelligence chief František Moravec, operating from the government in exile in London, began selecting candidates for what would become the most daring assassination attempt of the war. From approximately 2,000 Czech and Slovak soldiers who had escaped to Britain, Moravec selected 2 men. Josef Gabčík was Slovak, 29 years old, a career soldier who had fought before escaping. He was serious, disciplined, methodical, and completely committed to the resistance cause. Jan Kubiš was Czech, 28 years old, also a professional soldier with combat experience. He had escaped through Poland and France to reach Britain. He was slightly more outgoing than Gabčík, but equally determined. The British SOE trained them intensively for months at special facilities in Scotland. They learned weapons handling, explosives, silent killing techniques, survival skills, covert operations, parachute jumping, and radio operation. They studied maps of Prague until they could navigate blindfolded. They memorized Heydrich's schedule, his habits, his routes. The mission was codenamed Operation Anthropoid, from the Greek word meaning having the form of a human. It was an oddly philosophical name for an assassination mission. On December 28, 1941, exactly 1 week after the 1C conference, Gabčík and Kubiš parachuted into Czechoslovakia, along with other teams on different missions. The drop was rough and scattered. They were supposed to land near Pilsen, but navigation errors and bad weather scattered them. Gabčík injured his leg in the landing. They lost some equipment. They spent hours in freezing temperatures searching for each other before finally making contact. And immediately, they faced a fundamental problem. Who could they trust? They needed to contact the underground resistance to get false papers, safe houses, and information. But the resistance had been decimated by Heydrich's crackdown. The survivors were terrified and paranoid. When Gabčík and Kubiš finally made contact with resistance leaders in Prague, the reception was mixed. Some were inspired, others were horrified at what reprisals and assassination might provoke. They'd lived through Heydrich's brutal rule. They knew what he was capable of. The debate became heated. Some safe houses refused to help. Messages were sent to London. Cancel the mission. The reprisals will destroy us. But London didn't cancel. In fact, Beneš personally confirmed the order, kill Heydrich. Then intelligence arrived that made the decision urgent. Heydrich might be leaving Prague for a new position in France or Berlin. If he left in triumph, the mission would be a complete failure. They had to act immediately. Gabčík and Kubiš scouted Heydrich's route carefully for days. They needed a location where the car would slow down, where they'd have escape routes, where they could blend into civilians. They found the perfect spot, a sharp hairpin turn in the Prague suburb of Libing, near Bulovka Hospital. Every morning at 10:30 a.m., Heydrich's Mercedes would slow to almost walking pace to navigate this curve. There was a tram stop that provided perfect cover, and there were multiple streets for escape routes. May 27, 1942, a Wednesday morning, clear weather. Gabčík and Kubiš, dressed as ordinary workers, positioned themselves at the tram stop. Gabčík carried a Sten submachine gun, hidden under his raincoat. Kubiš had a modified anti-tank mine converted into a throwable bomb, concealed in a briefcase. A third operative, Josef Volčík, stood further up the street with a small mirror. When Heydrich's car approached, he would flash sunlight as a signal. At 10:32 a.m., right on schedule, the signal came. The dark green Mercedes appeared, slowing for the curve. Klein, Heydrich's driver, downshifted as they approached. Inside the open car sat Heydrich in his SS uniform, relaxed, reading documents. Gabčík stepped out from the tram stop, raised his Sten gun, and pulled the trigger from less than 5 meters away. Nothing happened. The gun jammed. For what felt like an eternity, time froze. Gabčík stood in complete shock, holding a useless weapon. Heydrich's car rounded the corner. The Nazi looked directly at his would-be assassin, clearly seeing the gun, clearly understanding what was happening. This was the moment where Operation Anthropoid could have ended in total failure. But instead of ordering Klein to accelerate and escape, Heydrich made a decision that revealed his fundamental character, his arrogance, his belief in his own invincibility. He ordered the car to stop. He was going to fight back. He was going to capture or kill these resistance fighters himself. He would prove that no Czech dare threaten an SS Obergruppenführer. As the Mercedes ground to a halt, Heydrich stood up in the open car and drew his Walther pistol. That's when Jan Kubiš acted. He rushed forward and hurled the modified anti-tank mine at the car. It was a desperate throw, not perfectly aimed, made under extreme pressure. The explosion was massive, loud enough to be heard across several city blocks. But here's the twist. The bomb didn't even hit Heydrich directly. It detonated against the rear wheel of the Mercedes, blowing a massive hole in the car's body. What killed Reinhard Heydrich wasn't the bomb's direct blast. It was fragments, horsehair stuffing from the car's leather upholstery, metal shards from the vehicle's body, springs from the seats, dirt and debris from the street, all of it driven deep into his body by the explosion, embedding in his spleen, puncturing his diaphragm, breaking his ribs. But in the immediate aftermath, no one knew how serious the injuries were. Heydrich actually got up from the shattered car. Blood was pouring from his wounds, but he was conscious, mobile, and furious. He chased Gabčík on foot for several meters, firing his pistol wildly, before finally collapsing from blood loss and pain. His driver Klein, also wounded, pursued Kubiš on his bicycle, until the assassin turned and shot him in the leg. Both assassins escaped into the chaos of the Prague streets, disappearing into crowds. A tram had just arrived, providing perfect cover. They split up and fled to different safe houses, and both Gabčík and Kubiš believed they had completely utterly failed. Heydrich was alive. He'd been conscious after the attack. He'd chased them. He'd fired back. To them it looked like they'd merely wounded him. They thought they'd just made things worse. They had no idea that deep inside Heydrich's body, dozens of tiny fragments, including that horsehair, were slowly poisoning his blood. Heydrich was rushed to Bolovica Hospital. Nazi doctors immediately began treatment. The wounds on initial examination didn't look immediately fatal. Broken rib, ruptured diaphragm, fragments in the spleen, but nothing instantly lethal. They operated to remove accessible fragments and repair damage. Heydrich remained conscious at times, giving orders even from his hospital bed. Doctors were cautiously optimistic. Hitler sent his personal physician, Dr. Karl Gebhardt, to oversee treatment. Gebhardt brought experimental sulfur drugs, early antibiotics, but 8 days later, on June 4, 1942, Heydrich's condition suddenly deteriorated. Sepsis had set in, blood poisoning from the embedded debris. The horsehair fragments carried bacteria deep into his organs. His immune system was overwhelmed. Reinhard Heydrich died in agony, in a Prague hospital bed at 4:30 a.m. He was 38 years old. He was killed not by the explosion itself, but by infected debris from his own luxury car, debris that had been driven into his body because he'd been too arrogant to use an armored vehicle. Hitler was furious when he learned of Heydrich's death, not just at the assassination, but at Heydrich's carelessness. In a private conversation, Hitler said, "Driving in an open unarmored vehicle, just damned stupidity, that a man as irreplaceable as Heydrich should expose himself to unnecessary danger. I can only condemn it as stupid and idiotic." But publicly, Hitler gave Heydrich an elaborate state funeral in Berlin with full Nazi pageantry. Hitler personally placed the highest German military decorations on Heydrich's funeral pillow: the German Order, the Blood Order Medal, the War Merit Cross. He called Heydrich the man with the iron heart in his eulogy. And then Hitler ordered revenge, massive, devastating revenge.